I have a motion to move 8.2 up on the agenda so we can hear from staff and entertain the motion. It's been moved by Marula, seconded by McCaddy. All those in favor? Carries. Thank you. And I would now call upon Alan Waterfield from our staff and Mr. Ron Palmer from Planning Partnership to present the study under 8.2. Alan, welcome. Ron, welcome. Mike's not working.
Is that better? Oh, that's good. Yeah. I'll refer to the Coles Notes version of my opening remarks. As some of the councillors already mentioned, I just wanted to note that this initiative, and certainly back when we were preparing the terms of reference for this study over a year ago, it was driven in part by Councillor Morelli. So I certainly hope that he would appreciate the direction that we're moving in today. As you will hear, that this is really just the first step in a series of many actions that maybe not necessarily on their own, but collectively will be able to work towards improving the fortunes of both Barton Street and Kenilworth Avenue. And again, just really briefly want to acknowledge the community members who have been so patiently waiting here today. And without any further delay then, I'd like to introduce Mr. Ron Palmer, who's principal with the Planning Partnership, who was the lead consultant on the study.
Thank you, Alan. Deputy Mayor, members of council, staff, it's great to be here. My first time before council in Hamilton. Trying to keep things moving. I wanted to start just by saying one phrase which has been subliminally burned into my brain as I sat in that chair up there. And it says, together aspire, together achieve. And I think that that is one of the fundamental messages here, is that there isn't one person, one body, one group that is going to achieve all of the objectives of this study. It's going to take a real coordinated, collaborative effort, including some people who aren't here. The absentee landlords, for example, will need to be involved. They're the owners, and they're your partners in achieving success in the long term. I'd like to start just by reminding everybody that while the Planning Partnership, my firm, was the lead consultant, we did have some very important sub-consultants on our team, including Cushman & Wakefield, who are commercial market analysts, as well as financial analysts, who helped us a tremendous amount in understanding some of the challenges on Barton Avenue and Kenilworth Street. Millier Dickinson Blay are economic development consultants who work across the province and have a Hamilton office. And Tier & Curran, a local architectural firm, helping us a little bit with some of the issues of detailed design and residential conversion. As you've already witnessed, there is a huge, dedicated, passionate group of people who either live in proximity to these corridors or work on these corridors. And we did meet with many of them. We had very engaging conversations, resulting in certainly some adjustments in our recommendations as they were first presented, and leading to our recommendations as we are today. So I thank those groups myself for helping me better understand some of the local objectives and some of the local challenges that we needed to overcome. Very quickly, the study areas were Barton Street from James all the way to Kenilworth, and Kenilworth from Barton to Main. One of the major challenges in dealing with in this study was simply the length of Barton Street. It is a very different context along its 4-kilometer length, with a lot of different issues and a different context within which revitalization may occur over time. One of the purposes of the study, we started with establishing vision statements. Those were based on meetings we had at Leuna, where we sat around a table and talked about the future with a whole group of residents and business operators. We took words from those meetings and created vision statements that are unique for each of Barton Street and for Kenilworth Avenue. Then we moved into identifying what kinds of changes, actions, and support mechanisms were required to achieve that vision in the long term and result in the positive change that I think everybody agrees is what we're trying to achieve. We looked very carefully at city land use policies, zoning regulations, design guidelines, what the state of the public realm, and that's parks, buildings, streets, and parking facilities within these areas that are owned by the city. And of course, the City of Hamilton is no stranger to financial incentive programs, so we wanted to have a look at what was available and what could be available here in these areas to help stimulate positive change. There were a couple of very specific issues that we were asked to address. Obviously, one of them was dealing with vacancy, and particularly vacancy in the commercial sector at grade. A linked issue was the illegal conversion of some of those vacant or derelict properties into residential apartments at grade. That became a very significant focus of our study and a conversation item all the way through the process. In terms of process, we started about a year ago. We started with a consultation forum in late November of last year and a visioning workshop in December. We produced a draft report, which was background information, all of our groundwork and detailed review of existing current policy documents here from the City of Hamilton. We produced a revised version of that report in January, and from that report prepared draft recommendations. We went to a consultation forum in late March where we presented draft recommendations, got lots of commentary, including the desire for more consultation, which we did in April and May of this year, and prepared our recommendations report for review at the public open house held in July. Today we're here with our final recommendations report, integrating all of the comments that we heard and adjusting those draft recommendations to meet the needs and the desires of the residents and businesses that we heard from. Obviously, I'm here today presenting to you the results of this work. Part of our work is talking about what are the assets and what are the challenges in these two corridors. Now, they are both different, but in a general term, there are significant assets in both of these corridors. There's some good public parks. There's other public uses like libraries, fire halls, a major hospital, and so on. Lots of places of worship. You've got good bones in both of these areas. You've got good interconnected street system. You've got on-street parking, and those are two really important components of what makes a successful commercial corridor. Finally, and as I've already mentioned, you have a huge group of extremely passionate, committed people who are totally committed to investment and improvement in these corridors. I've touched on some of the challenges, the illegal conversions of ground floor retail into residential dwelling units, the visible and substantial vacancy rates, particularly on Barton Street. And I look at it as a challenge is how to deal with some of those larger format, newer retail plazas that are sidewalk, parking lot, with the actual building set way back from the street. Again, we took our cue from staff and from all the stakeholders that we met with and had a chance to talk to. They've told us a lot of things, they've given us a lot of great ideas, and they've identified a tremendous number of issues that we were trying to resolve over the course of the study. Some of the key things that we take from that consultation process is that significant change is both required and desired, whatever that change might be. Again, lots of great ideas from all of the stakeholders and a great enthusiasm to participate, and not only participate in the study that we were involved in, but to continue that participation with city staff as this work gets implemented through other municipal tools over the next couple of years. I'm going to talk a little bit about this slide, which really talks about the fundamental basis of what we're trying to achieve here in both Barton and Kenilworth. I like to use this slide when we're talking about revitalization because it identifies a couple of key principles that I think if you've read the staff report, you'll see them come up a few times in some of the paragraphs. To facilitate positive change, in my mind, there are three fundamental elements of a successful implementation strategy. The first one is what I like to call establishing the environment for change. And that talks about strong political will and a commitment to that long-term vision. It includes public sector investment because public sector investment is intended to elicit a private sector response. The City of Hamilton also has some, as I mentioned, some really good assets in these corridors, and they need to use those assets strategically to help create this new environment for investment. The second prong of the philosophy is talking about reducing the risk of the development approvals process. Part of the revitalization of these two corridors is going to include intensification and redevelopment, and part of that is also residential development to get more people living in proximity to the commercial facilities that are so desired. We've gone through the planning policies that are applicable here, and the new urban official plan sets a framework which we think is appropriate, but it is difficult to achieve that framework with current zoning regulations that are in place. Now, we do know that the zoning bylaw is up for review, and we're hoping that some of our recommendations will help alleviate some of that dichotomy. We would also promote an idea that once the zoning bylaw is ready, that some of the sites or some of the areas along these corridors be pre-zoned for the approved development that is in the official plan. That's important because if it's pre-zoned, it's pre-approved for the development, and that removes the risk of the approvals process, time, potential appeals, and so on. The final prong in the philosophy of change is really about reducing the cost of development. And the reducing the cost of the development can be achieved in a number of ways, including straight financial incentives. And as I said, the City of Hamilton has a lot of experience with financial incentives. Enhancing the development potential, and again, that links back to pre-zoning and achieving the objectives of your current official plan. Promoting and facilitating public and private partnerships. You are a landowner, and you can use those assets to set the stage for change. One of the ones that we think is always important, which are direct costs to the developer, are how to deal with parking requirements and parkland standards. And those are things that need to be reviewed to make sure they're correct for an urban context and that they don't become so expensive that they frustrate appropriate development that you're trying to achieve. So moving on from that slide, in our report there are around 50 specific recommendations and directions that are categorized under land use recommendations, parking, traffic, and circulation recommendations, enhancements to the public realm, incentive programs, and then closing with how do you keep the momentum going through this process. I'm not going to go through all 50. I know everyone's upset by that. But I am going to talk about 6 priority actions. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, but one priority action is to update the land use policies and regulations in the official plan and the zoning bylaw. And what we're trying to do is broaden the permissions. We think it's really important to reduce parking standards in these corridors, and then increases in height as of right, and that is matching the zoning with the official plan. And just so everyone remembers, the official plan really talks about a 6-story built form in these corridors. The second priority action is about incentives, and we've made some recommendations that are intended to put together a shopping list. We recognize that the city will be updating the community improvement plan, and that's really the vehicle through which the city can provide incentives to the private sector. We think development charges need to be reviewed, parkland dedication requirements, planning and development fees. Some of the existing grant programs you have could be extended for a longer time frame, and increasing the amounts of housing loans and grants above what they are today to a higher number. All of these things will need to be considered and reviewed through the community improvement review process. Action 3 is about planning approvals, and it's not just about approvals for new development, it's new permitting for new uses that are already permitted, business permits, and so on. We're suggesting that the city put together a SWAT team that assists applicants as they come into the city to expedite approvals for both licenses and for development. Financing options, we heard loud and clear from some of the landowners that there's a real problem with the financial institutions and insurance companies providing funding for development in these 2 corridors. There's not much you can do directly except inform these institutions that there's something good coming and this is a good place to invest and that they should promote that. Number 5 is about transportation. Again, I said you have really good bones here. You've got lots of interconnectivity with the street network, although when I drive here, I'm constantly turning right because I'm never allowed to turn left. Some of those things are traffic issues that are a response to getting people through Barton and Kenilworth more quickly, and that's not necessarily the objective of a successful commercial street. You want to slow people down, you want to enhance accessibility. Certainly, we want to make sure that the transportation management study talks about the accommodation of cyclists and the improvement of the levels of comfort for pedestrians along these routes. Number 6 is, again, as I've mentioned, you have public assets in these corridors. We think that there's an opportunity for the city to say to a private sector developer, let's do something together. Let's show the way to these other landowners as to what we anticipate, how it can be successful, and what it should look like. Certainly as a pilot project, it does set a stage for the private sector to respond to. Moving from the priority actions to what I think could be done very quickly without a lot of cash outlay is continuing the conversation with the stakeholders, establishing community liaison networks for both of these corridors, I think would be a good idea to keep the conversation going and to leverage their passion and commitment. We heard a lot about enforcement of property standards and how that might impact the visual appeal of these corridors. We heard a lot about parking. We think that it's important to provide free parking in the municipal lots and along the streets and end peak hour prohibitions on parking. Certainly, this is an idea to get people to come here. We are completely aware of the sea of free parking at the center. Is it the Center Point Mall? In that mall, it's been totally redeveloped with several 100,000 square feet of retail. It's hard to compete if you can park for free there and not everywhere else. Edge treatments adjacent to vacant lots and large parking lots, I think, would enhance the visual appeal and the feeling of safety for pedestrians along these streets. Promoting murals and public art as part of an enhancement strategy on existing buildings that may be in disrepair. Again, identifying and building a city-led demonstration project, as I mentioned before. Trying to educate these absentee landlords about the tremendous opportunities in these corridors and why they should re-engage in not only the maintenance and improvement to the existing properties, but to be considering the potential for redevelopment and new development. Facilitation of pop-up opportunities. This is kind of a new thing where a business could occupy a vacant space for an hour, for a day, for a week. There needs to be a way to promote that and to facilitate it so that it doesn't take a week of approvals to open up a business for an hour. The Barton Street BIA needs some additional funding to continue their very good work. Again, they struggle with their finances, but they again are a very committed group and are really working together to try and promote the area. We also think that a BIA on Kenilworth would be a great idea to engage those existing business owners to promote their area and make it more successful, and to get a community or a secure funding source so that they can do marketing and maintenance activities. We heard a lot about policing and some concerns about safety in the evening, so we think that community policing could be enhanced in both of these corridors. And finally, my last point is we heard a lot about what is considered a tax incentive for keeping your property vacant that comes from the province. We're not exactly positive how to deal with that because it's not necessarily in your jurisdiction, but certainly having a conversation with the province about how that impacts certain components of your city and the inability to get people to redevelop or to have the space occupied if they're given a tax incentive not to do that. That's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer as many questions as I can.
Thank you. I have Councillor Marula and then Councillor Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and many thanks for the presentation. As we've spoken before, with respect to item 8, the area has all of the benefits of a BIA except not paying for it. So at this point, I'm not sure why that would be advantageous, except if you're looking at it from a governance perspective. So could you just elaborate on that?
Sure. First of all, just so you know, I'm a huge supporter of business improvement areas, and in fact, I sit on the board of management where my office is. So I think they're an excellent vehicle to do a couple of things. First of all, it is a vehicle to get the business owners together and for them to start working together and thinking together about how they could improve the area. Certainly, BIAs are involved in marketing. They're involved in events. They're involved in maintenance. the BIA that I'm part of is also involved in capital improvements and investments. So I think that it's a great way to have a consistent and confirmed budget that can be used for the common good.
Well, on that point, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I guess what I'm trying to stress is they have all of those they have all the incentive programs in place. What they need really is an association in order to have a governance structure. But I'd hate to go down the road of taxing them for the BIA. They already have all the incentives for it. So I think on that front, I think we should maybe take a step back and maybe look at it as an association as opposed to a BIA.
You could do that. And I'm not talking really about the incentives. I'm talking about a pot of money for them to spend on marketing and maintenance. That is a steady and confirmed budget.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be an additional tax. That is a decision to be made if there's a desire to do it. It could be a component of the existing tax, depending on how the city prefers.
And that's what I would prefer to do it at first and phase in ultimately to lead to getting to the point of Ottawa Street.
I totally agree. You need to go through some steps to get to the end, and it doesn't necessarily start off with this is a new tax for you to spend.
Okay, great. So maybe we should just highlight the fact that we should be focusing in on the incentives that do exist and organize it from a governance perspective firstly. So,
sure.
To you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
That's fine.
I have some comments that might assist in answering that question. I think in terms of establishing a BIA on Kenilworth Avenue, I think it's at this point in time is more of the long-term vision.
Right.
Really, it's going to be those business owners along the street who will choose to do that. We wouldn't impose a BIA in any situation. And I think at this stage in the process, just because the community has just begun to engage those business and property owners along the street, that it's more so now at the stage of just establishing those relationships and building trust and coming together to meet, to talk,
okay,
as opposed to getting right down to the whole idea of a BIA at this point in time.
Okay, but just for a point of clarification, we've been engaged with them actively on BIA since 2007. It's always fallen off the rails as a result of a lack of engagement, particularly from the toxic landlords that we need to focus in on. So having said that, the reason why I initiated the benefits without the BIA was because of that reason. Our hands were handcuffed. We couldn't move forward. So hence the incentives were there, but they haven't really been tapped into because I'm not sure what more we can do to communicate it, firstly, consistently, and secondly, effectively, that these incentive programs, everything that exists downtown Hamilton, convert to residential, the facade, Kenilworth has. And for the life of me, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I can't imagine as a landlord why they wouldn't be tapping into those funds. It just baffles me. So could you elaborate on that particular issue?
Well, certainly we think that there needs to be a very significant education program for the absentee landlords and an advertising directly to them about the potential of these incentive programs that exist or ones that could be added to in the future. Other than telling them, you can't do much more. You can't force them to use it.
We do have another option, and through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, what I'm seriously considering is the possibility, because of the absentee landlords and the crack dens they almost look like on Kenilworth Avenue North, the real problematic ones. I'm in a position right now where I could see myself focusing in on an initiative to expropriate every single one of those, as we did with City Motor, and go toe-to-toe with them. And just as a public notice, that is going to be my position. If things don't turn around very quickly, we're going to come in, as we did the City Motor, take the blight off the face of the earth, particularly the East End, and work forward to redeveloping it. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, on that front, what would you anticipate as a problematic situation along those lines?
Expropriation is a very powerful tool. And first of all, I have no problem with that idea. And in fact, I would suggest that, again, like implementing a BIA, you go in steps. And first of all, in cases of tax arrears, you should be less forgiving and simply take the property, especially if it's been a problematic property, as a first step. Second step is if there is a continuing problem, partly enforcement and penalties related to that may get somebody motivated to do something. And thirdly, if it just continues to be a problem, you always have that tool.
All right, so firstly, what I'd like to do is serve notice that I will be actively pursuing expropriation. Secondly, the actual enforcement component, Bill Young, I'm not sure if he's still in the room, but we have pursued for nearly 7 years OMB proceedings very exhaustively. We won some, we lost some, but those that we did lose, they're the problematic landlords. So we're at a point now of really no option except the expropriation angle. So I just want to serve notice publicly that will be my position. Having said that, on the other fronts, I think we can work well. I think the parking, what you said earlier through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, is that the political will is there. The private funding has been there. We've invested a significant amount of money on Kenilworth Avenue from south all the way down to Burlington Street, particularly from an infrastructure standpoint. We now need the private sector, as happened when I was first elected on Ottawa Street, to buy in to the Renaissance. And for some reason, this particular stretch is far more problematic than others. So. And I love a lot of what you said. Some of it I disagree with, but I think we need to be far more proactive, far more aggressive, and I will be taking that approach. And I thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Have Councillor Farr next.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And as you know, I've great confidence in the previous speaker's abilities, whether it's the aggressive approach as referenced and as proven, and as well following some of the guidelines that are before us for consideration today. I commend both Councillor Marula, Councillor Morrow, and of course Councillor Morelli for initiating this extremely important initiative, and one that I know eventually will come to fruition. We'll see great revitalization, a renaissance, as previously noted, will occur, and I'm really grateful to have heard the delegates as well speaking. I was in the green room there and hearing the presentations and the comments afterwards. Certainly I've been part of the discussion. I sat in first a staff meeting, and what's notable is from the get-go with the consultants in the room, I think all appropriate staff, all appropriate departments and divisions were present. We had bylaw, we had real estate, we had planning and planners and everybody that needed to be in the room, and of course urban renewal, and all with some very good comments early on to set the stage, and was probably helpful to our consultant as well. Fast forward some months later, one of the community meetings at the corner of Kenilworth and Barton, and some months ago, and the upheaval that ensued, welcome to the inner city of Hamilton. There are very passionate, knowledgeable people who have, for generations, embraced this community through good and bad times, and you learned that firsthand that particular evening. And what's impressive is we got a lot of good takeaways and acted accordingly, and from the comments from the community here today, since then, that's clearly evidence. So priority action number 2, 3 questions. Priority action number 2, if you could go to that slide. And we're asking questions of staff afterwards, or if there's something that can, for clarification.
I'm fairly flexible on it, so
you are.
By all means, go ahead.
Very good.
Yep.
So I may have then a question of staff on priority action 2, incentives, and on the development charges. So we, as you probably are aware, through the chair, are you aware that we recently have gone through and ratified how we're dealing with development charges about a month ago here around this?
I was aware it was underway. I didn't see the conclusion of that.
Okay, so it's a de-escalating in the CIPA area. We're at 90 now, and in about a year, I believe, Brad, it's 85. 5% each year for the next 5 years. So through you, Chair, you're aware that we're actually in the CIPA as it stands now, going in a different direction? And if you are aware, can you tell me why you're looking at it as a priority action when we've taken action in the last month?
I can't, through you, Mr. Chair, I can't always anticipate everything that the city does unless somebody tells me. Notwithstanding that, it would still be my opinion that you could look at development charges as a tool that is a part of the cost of development. And if development charges are considered punitive or too excessive to facilitate development, then they should be looked at to be reduced.
I think we're pretty aggressive in terms of an incentive, even with this de-escalating scale as it stands now. So I just wanted to point that out. Also, recently this week in Planning Committee, we're looking at asking staff to report back on parkland dedication. So I think it's important to note here today that staff pay attention to that we're part of our discussion in Planning Committee. And your SWAT team, what slide was that? That was priority action number 3. I'm really interested in learning more about what you're contemplating here. So maybe you could expand on what you mean by establishing an approvals SWAT team through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Good question. We heard through the consultation process that it's a problem to get through an approvals process, whether it's for new development or for something as simple as a business license. The idea of the SWAT team is that somebody comes to the City of Hamilton for an approval. There's one person that they can go to who can assemble all of the various affected staff members, sit down and figure out how to approve it.
Through the Deputy Mayor, then, essentially what you're saying is a dedicated staff as it relates to Barton, Kenilworth, to facilitate all those avenues of potential red tape and bureaucracy.
I would say if the demand warrants a dedicated staff, but or do you mean just someone that they know they can talk to?
And this is to achieve more expeditious action?
Absolutely.
Through
speed is money.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, to Chris Murray, we've had these discussions. Former GM of Planning and I have had these discussions. I'm a strong proponent of something similar to this, and not necessarily just for Barton Kenilworth, but your thoughts, certainly, and maybe you could generalize some of the discussions you and I have had in the past, and for public record, on priority action 3, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Deputy Mayor. Yes, we've had conversations about exactly this, individuals that are able to navigate, all the approvals or matters that are of concern to the organization. Someone, instead of sending the person who doesn't know our system well, one of our own can certainly navigate what goes on. And I think that's what most people expect. They just, you're not skilled at knowing all of our detail. We are, and we should be able to sort through it ourselves. So I think in some respects we have something that's like that on the first floor. I know if you have a business interest and you want to expedite a permit or get a permit approved, we have people down there that will take your matter up, and then we'll shepherd it through the system. But projects like what you might be talking about here, we could benefit from having people that would help shepherd shepherd a project through. It's different than what a business permit might be. So, having people that can work with citizens in that regard, and would make a lot of sense. It would be, some additional FTEs in our organization, but there's probably pretty good value that will be returned.
Thank you, Chris. On the additional FTE point, I recollect we probably had a conversation or two about trying to rejig existing to answer that concern, and which is also a possibility. And certainly whenever we have an opportunity to explore your SWAT team further, I'm on board to talk about it, and I think it's a prudent move. Finally, and Councillor Marula picked up on it, you have your 10 quick wins. Can you explain to me, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, how point 8 is associated to, I think it was point 2, as it relates to the Barton Street BIA and all their good work? In point 2 on your quick wins, I think it is, if you can go back one page, you are suggesting the 3 hours of free parking is 0.3. And of course, a lot of BIA revenue comes from the meters and the coins and so forth. So go to 0.8 in your quick wins, please. How are you, so if you're suggesting we provide additional financial support because they're losing it if we offer the free parking through you, Chair? How does that tie in, 0.3 and 0.8?
They're linked. That is correct.
Okay.
We heard that part of their funding is from parking resources.
Okay. You know, let's go full circle through you, Chair. From the evening I referenced, the second PIC, the evening on Barton and Kenilworth, and the passion in that room, and a very well attended PIC and excellent points, a real opportunity missed, unfortunately, because we actually cut the meeting short for one of our preeminent architects to share. It was a wonderful way that we were going to wrap up, but he couldn't even do it. There was so much passion in the room. Take us to where we were at that point, which was the angst. I'm saying passion, but there certainly was angst and negative energy, to where we are now. What did we do as an answer to that public engagement, maybe as a lesson in public engagement, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor?
Well, I might have a different impression than everybody else, but here's what I think. We were going through an exercise that was not a question and answer exercise. It was more of a individual engagement based on specific issues. There was one specific issue, and it's all about whether or not residential should be allowed at grade. And a couple people were very concerned about that particular issue, and at the end kind of dominated the conversation to the point where we needed to end the meeting, and then I went and spoke with them one-on-one. Well, it was 1-on-2, me and 2 of them. From that meeting, the 2 things happened. First of all, the public engagement process was enhanced so that we could talk about that issue in more detail. And secondly, based on all that feedback that I got, I completely redid the recommendations related to whether or not residential would be permitted at grade, and if it was, where. That new recommendation was taken to the public open house and discussed. Further refinements to my recommendation were made, to the point where I think we dealt with everybody's concern. So it's my opinion that the recommendations on that very specific topic are now in line with what people were looking for.
Very specific, but extremely important topic.
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you.
I want to remind you, and you've probably forgotten because it was 4 or 5 hours ago, that at 2 o'clock we were going to recess the GIC meeting to convene the Hamilton Renewable Power Inc. shareholder meeting that was scheduled for 2 o'clock. I anticipate that won't last very long, depending on how many speeches we decide to, yes. Yes, sir.
It's my understanding, Mr. Deputy Mayor, because we have so many people here from the neighborhood, that legally we're entitled to go a half an hour before the meeting needs to be canceled. So why wouldn't we at least try to fit it in within the next 30 minutes?
No problem. I have a speakers list after Councillor Farr of Councillors Morrow, Councillor Whitehead, myself, and McCaddy. And then, of course, we need to put the motion.
So just very quickly, it's been a fascinating process to watch from a bit of a distance. I'm in Ward 1, so watching my colleagues and from a planning perspective, planning process perspective, it's been fascinating to watch too. And Alan, I heard the accolades up there earlier from the community, so hats off to you for that. So just a general comment that this appears to be a really, really healthy, grassroots-driven planning process. I just want to congratulate the folks from the Neighborhoods Gala at Crown Point, the Sherman Hub, who are here today. And I've had the opportunity over the last month or two to spend lots of time in East Hamilton, learning about the process from the folks involved and learning from Councillor Marula and Farr and Morrow. So it's a really great example of a grassroots process with coming to the very best of conclusions, which is where you should end up if it comes from the grassroots. So congratulations to everyone.
I have one quick question before I move to Councillor Marula, and that is the as-of-right zoning changes that were proposed. How quick can that be accomplished in terms of raising the intensification levels on Barton Street? Those buildings were certainly purpose-built almost 100 years ago in some cases. And if we're looking at residential intensification, instead of putting the cost on some of these small building owners, small businesses, how easy is it for the municipality to switch gears through a public process, obviously, to change the heights and even add residential uses to some buildings where it's currently non-existent?
You could start that process immediately. You could draw it out of the overall comprehensive review of your zoning bylaw and say we want to look at these two corridors and do some pre-zoning for appropriate development right now. Of course, it goes through the Planning Act process, rights to appeal, and all of that goes with that, but certainly you could do that.
I understand that from going through that process, it almost immediately increases the property values of
it sure does.
Entire stretch.
It sure does.
So what is the plan coming from the recommendations? I know it's on the list in terms of something to seriously consider, but what's the go-forward plan? Is that something that waits several months for us to take the initiative? Have we given direction through the neighborhood groups and the respective ward councillors to get the ball rolling on that?
I could answer that one. The recommendations from this report will be rolling forward into the upcoming work through the comprehensive review of the zoning bylaw. So currently the rural zones are being completed, and the commercial and residential zones, which would include these corridors, I believe is on schedule for next year.
But does it happen on its own, or does it happen with other work? And I only ask that from an appeal process perspective. If it's separated from other things that may be a little bit contentious, it's less likely to be appealed. If it's on its own, and it has support from those people who live in the area, it's probably more likely to succeed a lot quicker. Plan on that?
Yes.
Through, I'm assuming I'm going through Councillor Clark, the previous
Mr.
chair.
Thorne. Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. The current plan is to look at that as part of the comprehensive review of the mixed zoning policies next year, so we'll be looking at that comprehensively for the city. There certainly would exist the opportunity, if there are areas that are looking to be more controversial than others, to separate out those processes. The current plan is to look at mixed uses and mixed use zoning comprehensively.
Well, I would suggest, just respectfully, that in light of the fact that we already have done a lot of the legwork with this one, that this one be separated for the purposes of expediting it. And anyway, I got my answer, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. We'll take the chair back. Then I'll go to first to move the presentation to receive. Moved by Marula, seconded by Clark. All those in favor? Carries. Thank you. Councillor Marula, now on the motions that's in front of us.
Just quickly, Mr. Deputy Mayor, many thanks for allowing us to continue. As I mentioned earlier, the Barton Street study was Bernie's vision. We've seen this come to fruition. He allowed me to include the Kenilworth one, and with the support of council, we had it on there. And I'm proud that we have been able to do that. Kenilworth, and I'm going to isolate Kenilworth because Councillor Morrow, I'm sure, has something to say about the Barton section. But with respect to Kenilworth, since 2007, we've had 4 formal attempts at BIAs to no avail. We spent hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars at OMB challenging the landlords who are illegally positioned there and are located there. We've worked in incorporating the BIA incentives that exist in Kenilworth and communicated that accordingly to all of the business owners more than once. Oh, sorry, my apologies. We established all of the incentives for a BIA on Kenilworth. We communicated it to all the business or the property owners. We've I had worked. I had worked on implementing those incentives, and with the support of the residents, we've seen some improvement. We've seen the Crown Point Pharmacy strip mall that was developed. We at council, in conjunction with together with the community, were able to redevelop the parking lot. We were able to fund the flower hangers and the planters. We've seen some success. but we are so far from seeing it to the level in the surrounding neighborhood. On Ottawa Street, the Centre Mall, the entire Ward 4 East Hamilton area is going through a renaissance, and Kenilworth has lagged behind. And the reason why we're lagging behind is not because of any public sector issues, but that of a few very bad apples in the private sector. And again, I am warning publicly, I'm providing a public notice that we and I will focus in on expropriating those problem properties and ensure we reverse the toxicity that exists there with those properties. And I give you my word. I appreciate your time.
So I have no further speakers on the item. Councillor Clark.
Just to clarify then, so, because your question was speaking to, in essence, severing out that part of Kenilworth from the municipal comprehensive review.
And Barton Street.
And we heard staff saying that it could be done, but we haven't actually done that. So
yeah, it's so moved. I got so emotional on the other issues.
It's okay.
Moved by myself, seconded by Clark. Thanks.
So that would be a report back on the process we could take to separate those two areas for the purposes of the zoning.
And many thanks for that suggestion,
no
Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Anytime. So it's been moved and seconded then on that direction. Let's formalize that as was suggested. It'll be moved by Councillor Marula, seconded by Councillor Clark, to add that to the recommendations that are in front of us. All in favour? Carry. And then on the main motion as amended, now moved by Marula, seconded by Morrow. All those in favour? Carries. Thank you. I want to thank everyone who attended today. You very patient. Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Councillor Powers.
Just before we leave on this issue, there's two people that I want to thank. I want to thank Joanne Priel and Paul Johnson, because during this term of council, we never saw these things in past councillors and things like that, and they're actually making outreach to the neighborhoods that best need our assistance in a very planned program that gives us. And so to Joanne and Paul, thank you for your efforts, and forgot her name. Suzanne. I was about to say Susan, but Suzanne. Thank you.
Thank you for that.